Hello all of you jackoffs and wounded pigeons. Since this is an ongoing series, I don't want to keep the intros extremely long. So, let's get to the review. Episode 1, let's jump into it.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
The Season 3 premiere of South Park has the boys becoming part of a choir tour. This episode has Cartman being an even bigger dick than the previous 2 seasons, because he's just more obnoxious and doesn't shut his damn mouth. Jennifer Aniston lends her voice in this episode, which is a bit weird, because that isn't a typical South Park thing to do. She's alright, she doesn't do anything special, but I like how her head tilts are animated. I also did like her character being used as a normal one for the characters to bounce off of. This episode is really well liked, and I kind of get it. Cartman is being a dick through the whole thing, and he's the fan favourite. This episode also introduces Craig. He's okay at this point. The tone of this episode feels a lot closer to the South Park I like. The characters feel more expressive, and the plot feels more focused. I like this episode. It isn't anything special, but it is pretty funny and the plot is focused.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Spontaneous Combustion has Kyle trying to get an erection so that he can give it to his mum. If you haven't seen this episode, it's not as gross as it sounds. He gets resurrections mixed up with erections. Meanwhile, people keep spontaneously combusting, and the mayor asks Randy to find a solution to the problem. Other than Clubhouses, this is the first real Randy episode, and I wouldn't even really call the Clubhouses episode a Randy one, but I definitely think this is one. Since this is the first episode that really tries to establish Randy's character, it is a weaker one from him. He's not nearly as over the top. In fact, he's actually quite competent at his job that he shouldn't even be working on. Even though Randy is a bit weak, the funniest joke in this episode is Randy related. Him picturing himself as the most popular person in town, especially the old woman bit.
Randy, Randy, Randy.
We love you, Randy.
Make love to me, Randy, please.
I enjoyed Cartman portraying Jesus just because of the ending where he's all skinny. While I don't like fart jokes, I did find it amusing that Cartman's mum was looking for him and used it as a way to do her fart joke, even though he was in fact missing. Once again, this episode had focus. In the first couple of seasons, too many plots were being used as part of an episode, when I feel like they could have covered a whole episode. This episode does have 2 plots, but they do connect a lot, and the erection one isn't one I'd want to cover a whole episode anyway. It just gives the right amount of time to each plot, and it doesn't feel like it wastes either. I don't think this episode is hilarious, or has a brilliant plot, or fantastic characters, but at this point the show is definitely getting closer and closer to that, and becoming more consistent. The show's getting close to finding what it wants to be. Overall, I like this episode.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
In the succubus, the boys find out about Chef's new girlfriend that has drained the fun out of Chef. Here's a spoiler. Listen closely. She's a succubus! Huh. Bet you didn't see that coming. Also, Cartman gets glasses. I like the Cartman fat jokes at the beginning of the episode. Irritating Cartman is always funny. I also like Mr. Derp. I enjoy him advertising himself as a great character. Mr. Garrison talking about Poontang is pretty funny too. Without a doubt in my mind, my favourite moments, and easily my favourites from, well, so far, some of my favourites from the whole series, Chef's parents talking about the Loch Ness Monster. I love everything about those bits. Something about it is just so hilarious to me.
Well, it was about that time that I noticed this Girl Scout was about 8 stories tall and was a crustacean from the Pleistocene.
I don't find the story in this one very interesting, and I don't think the succubus stuff itself gets a lot of good jokes. The best bit was just the excuse to meet Chef's parents.
It said, how about just $2.50? I said, oh, now it's only $2.50. What is that, a sale on Loch Ness Munchies or something?
Lord, he was angry.
Damn right I was angry.
Not you, the monster. He was about to kick your ass.
Overall, and this hurts me to say since I adore the Loch Ness Monster moments, I love those moments, but I don't care about a lot from the episode. But those moments are so good for me and make it so I don't feel bored when watching any of the episode because I've always got that on my mind in the episode. That instead of mediocre, I'm going to give it a just about like.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
This episode has the boys discovering what I'm going to call it through the rest of this, because I'm mature as fuck, the jack-off, and the town wondering what to do with it. Meanwhile, Ned needs a new voice box. The voice box plot felt short and a bit pointless, like a lot of early season South Park B-plots. This episode is South Park doing its parody of Jar Jar Binks. They make the creature intentionally, incredibly irritating. This is one of the least popular South Park episodes, and I do get why. The creature is annoying for the audience. In general, I do think it's better to find a way for the characters to be irritated over something, but where we, the audience, don't find it annoying, or at least not as annoying as the characters. However, I do think the choice works here for the most part. I don't find them as annoying as most people seem to, so the characters do react worse to them than I react to them. There are points where I find them too annoying though. The main issue is just that the whole episode pretty much relies on them being annoying. None of those jokes are hilarious anyway. I don't think this is like top 5 worst South Park material. The fact the animation is smoother than anything in season 1, and the plot feels more focused, and it has a few pretty funny moments, means it's not one of the worst for me. My favourite moments goes to Mr. Garrison calling the wounded pigeon he had sex with a slut.
Garrison, you remember what happened to the wounded pigeon you were supposed to take care of?
Oh, come on, you all know that pigeon was a total slut.
It's so great and stupid. I also did like the town putting the jack-off against Bar Brady in a question-based show. This episode has the pretty popular moments of Cartman singing about hating the guys. I'm not a big fan. I'm a fan of Cartman. I like the moment because I like Cartman as a character, but it's not a big standout. Overall, I'm not a fan of this episode, but I don't think it's one of the worst episodes in the series. The creatures are annoying and the episode is over-reliant on a joke I'm not a huge fan of anyway. I don't like it, but I don't dislike it. I think it's mediocre.
Come on down south, Buck, and meet some friends, man.
No doubt being where the Yowie art mostly came from, the Yowie episode being one I find brilliant by the way. This episode has the boys trying to get Tweek and Craig to fight. Meanwhile, Kenny's in a much less dangerous lesson with every girl from their class. Meanwhile, Mr. Alder has trouble dating because of his wife's death haunting him. Craig's voice is a little hard to listen to as something is off. I think it's just less deep. The Kenny plot is probably the worst. The only good thing is Kenny being afraid of getting injured by going to shop class. Kyle's personality clearly hasn't evolved a lot yet, as I can't imagine him encouraging a fight in the more recent seasons. While this episode has Tweek and Craig in the title, the episode makes a bigger deal out of Mr. Alder. Tweek and Craig seem to be given more substance, but he's given more comedy. Definitely feels like a character Matt and Trey wanted to be a fan favourite. The plots in this episode are coherent and pretty well paced. That's always good. For funny moments, I like Craig's family flipping each other off. I like Cartman's racist accent as he probably believes he's speaking in another language. And Jimbo teaching Tweek to kick in the balls because it's boxing. None were extremely funny though. I don't find this episode particularly funny, but it does have pretty good pacing and expands the world by introducing Mr. Alder. It also gives us a better look at Craig's family and gives more depth to Craig and to Tweek as characters. I think this episode is mediocre, but I am liking the consistency with well-paced stories this season.
Come on down south, Buck, and meet some friends, man.
For some reason I thought Sexual Harassment Panda was a few episodes later in the season. Don't know why, just did. Sexual Harassment Panda speaks to the school about sexual harassment. Cartman then sues Stan for sexual harassment, which is just brilliant because he's obviously abusing the power. Gerald, Cartman's lawyer and Kyle's dad, then tries to get as many cases as possible. I love Sexual Harassment Panda. Can you imagine if I didn't say panda? Holy shit, some people would actually say that. His song is great, and he sounds pretty much just like Santa Claus, but it works for his character design. I like the recurring bit of the school losing more and more money. Most of the comedy comes from people abusing the system, whether it's Cartman or Kyle's dad. Some have reasonable cases, others no. My favourite moments are Skeeter causing trouble.
Did you guys see a big panda bear in here or not?
We don't take kindly to panda bears.
Well, we don't take kindly to you.
Well, we don't take kindly to folks that don't take kindly around here.
I do also like the island of misfit mascots.
Hey, kids! I'm Jimmy, the don't hold on to a large magnet while someone else uses a fan nearby Falcon.
I feel like the panda does get sexual harassment mixed up with sexual assault a lot. Maybe the terms have changed since the airing of this episode, and it makes it a bit dated, I'm not sure. This is probably my favourite episode so far. This feels like a good sort of base episode for South Park. It feels like how South Park should. It has an ongoing argument from two or more sides of an argument, while adding classic South Park moments and ridiculousness. I like this episode. It isn't quite great enough to be a really like, but it was close to being the first one.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Cat Orgy is a part 1 of 3. Sort of. This and the next 2 episodes are set over the same night, but don't really connect. The fact that this is set at the same time as the other episodes is great. I think it shows that in one day in South Park, there isn't just one story, there's many. The characters all have stories, some we just don't see. It makes the characters feel more alive and like they actually live in that world. The plot for this episode is that Cartman gets babysat by Stan's sister Shelly. Also, the cat's in heat. The character choices here are a little strange. Shelly and Cartman aren't characters you'd expect to interact much, but ultimately those are the main characters in this story. Though I do find Shelly's character pretty one-note, and it's mostly irritating because of that, rather than the reason you're supposed to be irritated by her. Her being a dick, that's why you're supposed to hate her. Though I do feel that way, I think a big problem for her character in the early seasons, and just in general, is that she mostly interacts with Stan. If she just interacted with more characters, then I might like her more as a character. Not as a person. She's a terrible person. It's something I call the Cartman or Roger effect, where you can like their character, but they're terrible as people go. I say people like that because Roger's an alien. To me, it's important to differentiate the character as a character and the character as a person, because by that logic, every time someone's an arsehole in a show, it makes them a bad character. When I just don't believe that, it makes them a bad person, it doesn't make them a bad character. Otherwise, villains would be shit. That all said, she isn't much more entertaining here, she's just more possible to tolerate. Shelly and Skylar's relationship is
Creepy as shit.
not too much more to add to that, other than that, unfortunately. Yeah, this happens in real life and it's gross. Plot this time is pretty solid. It gets a lot out of the babysitting plot and this night, but that's connected to the other 2 episodes too. Unfortunately for this episode, there aren't really many standout funny moments. Cartman as a character is entertaining, but for individual funny moments, there's not that many here for me. Overall, I think this episode is mediocre, a very middle of the road mediocre.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
The second part of the meteor shower night, 2 naked guys in a hot tub, has 2 guys, Randy and Gerald, naked in a hot tub at Mr. Mackey's meteor party. They masturbate in front of each other, and then Randy feels awkward around Gerald. Meanwhile, the ATF thinks the party is a suicide cult. Meanwhile, Stan is forced to stay with the other kids in the party, the kids in question being Pip, Butters, and Dougie. The 3 kids Stan is left with are the least popular kids in the school. Pip is Pip, nothing new there. Really, what makes this episode truly worth its existence, regardless of its overall quality anywhere else, is that it's basically Butters' first appearance. He has appeared before, but this is the first time he gets an important role. Butters' voice is slightly off in this episode though, but it is fairly close to what it becomes, and isn't too far off. Dougie is a character that I ultimately associate with Butters. He's a pretty good sidekick for Butters. The plots, like most good stories in a show with multiple plots, connect well with each other. My favourite moment is easily the ATF shooting the couple.
Do not move or we will be forced to shoot.
God damn it, who was that? Did you see them move? I did.
Yeah. Yeah, they moved all right.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they moved. I also like how they portrayed Gerald as if he was a needy person in a relationship with Randy. I tend to like when a show does that sort of joke. I also like how ultimately, nobody gives a shit what Randy and Gerald did with each other in the hot tub. The pacing of this episode is really good. It always feels like plenty's happening with relatively simple plots, but never like it's wasting a story. I don't think this episode has the best story or the best comedy. That said, the story that is here is good. What comedy it does have is good. I liked this episode. There was never a point where I thought it was anything genius. It's just a dumb fun episode where I was never bored. I don't really have any problems with this episode, but the stuff that made it good wasn't like through the roof levels of awesome.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Kyle and Kenny take part in a Jewish Scouts thing. Ike is part of the Squirts group. Kenny and Kyle aren't a combination I find particularly funny. They get along well a lot, and one of them is just hard to understand, though I tend to understand decent amounts of what Kenny says. While this episode is coherent, I guess, I don't find anything about it to stand out. My thoughts are quite weird when it comes to this one. Nothing is bad about it other than it being light in terms of funny moments. The episode as a whole is quite forgettable, but it isn't particularly boring. It's just light on humour. I do kind of like all of the squirts getting taken. I also kind of liked Moses because of how ridiculous and random he is in this. Overall, I find this episode to be mediocre, forgettable, but not irritatingly boring.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Korn's Groovy Pirate Ghost mystery has the boys being scared by the 5th graders due to pirate ghosts. The boys then dig up Kyle's grandma to scare the 5th graders. This episode is a Scooby-Doo parody, a bit odd considering earlier in the same season with the episode Spontaneous Combustion, it had a clip that was also a Scooby-Doo parody. As a Scooby-Doo parody, they do a lot that helps add to the Scooby-Doo vibe. They adjust the dialogue of Korn and the animation style of them, and the ghosts look like a perfect combination of Scooby-Doo and South Park. This episode had quite a few good scenes. I like Cartman having his hand up a donkey or horse's ass, only to think it's called spaghetti. I really like Cartman's mum laughing at the kids' jokes, only to piss off Cartman. My favourite moments though were the ones vividly describing what might have happened to Kyle's dead grandma.
What?
We don't want to upset you, but it happens. Somebody's probably making love to her corpse as we speak.
Every vile position, every disrespectful act imaginable.
Oh, dear God!
Yes, by now he's probably even removed her eyes and made love to the empty sockets as well.
A bit of missed potential in my opinion to have killed off a character we haven't met, like Kyle's grandma, but he likely has another grandma that is still alive, so they could always do a story with them if they want, and adjust the character to fit a story they'd want, for whatever reason they'd want. This year's Halloween special revamps the intro like season 1 did. The story is well paced for everything should work, and it kind of does, but to put it simply, I just didn't find myself enjoying this one much. I think this episode's mediocre.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Chinpokomon has the children of South Park being obsessed with Chinpokomon, but the cartoon is also used to turn the kids against America. Who's your favourite Chinpokomon? Mine's Shoe. I love its laces. The story in this one is pretty good, obviously being a parody of the Pokemon craze that I'm guessing was happening at the same time as this episode. It mixes Pokemon in with subliminal messages, and older generations not understanding the new generation's thing. It's a pretty good story with real life, well talked about things to make fun of, something South Park is known for. This is a really highly looked at episode, and I kind of get it for the time it came out in. It came out in what I consider a weak period for South Park, and is one of the earliest South Park episodes with pretty good satire. Granted, I don't think this episode is extremely clever, and I definitely don't consider it one of the best South Park episodes, but I do see this episode, and to a decent extent too, Sexual Harassment Panda, as big stepping stones to South Park becoming the cartoon I and many others like so much. That's not to say the first 3 seasons aren't liked, I'm pretty sure they're really well liked, but I just like a different period of the show. For best jokes, there's pretty much 2 for me. I love Shoe, and I really like the guy talking about big American penises.
Oh, what an immense penis!
Well, it certainly was nice meeting you folk. I just wanted to bring that little malfunction to your attention. Bye-bye now.
Goodbye. Thank you for stopping by with your gargantuan penis.
Overall, I like this episode. I don't think it's great, but I can see how it paved the path a little bit for what I think becomes one of the best cartoons of all time.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Hooked on Monkey Phonics, I remember quite well, but only after I remember, yes, it exists. Did you know it exists? Yeah, me too, kinda. This episode has the public schooled kids versus the homeschooled ones in a spelling bee. Fun fact,
Croxeldefific.
What?
Croxeldefific.
is not a real word. I think this episode is a nice change of pace, having Kyle have a crush on someone instead of Stan, but realistically it's just because Stan and Kyle are still pretty plain at this point in the series. Though, to be honest, Stan will pretty much stay that way through the whole series. As for likes for this episode, I enjoyed seeing the parents mirror their children's actions, and I think the funniest moment is the mayor giving Kyle an impossible word to spell. It's not even a real word, so they could bullshit the spelling however they wanted. Though it probably is real in the South Park world, so to the few characters that do know the word, it's likely a perfectly cromulent word for them. As for negatives, that's part of the issue. There's no particular moment that sours the episode, it's mostly just boring to sit through. Boring to me doesn't mean flat out bad though, as there's other factors like the voice acting, which is alright, the animation, which is alright, the fact the story is coherent helps it out. Most of the problem coming from a lot of these episodes is the lack of fun, interesting characters for me. Overall, yeah, I find this episode mediocre.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
For starters, I like how ridiculous the mere concept of a Starving Marvin sequel is. It's Marvin in space. Whoa! Marvin gets access to a spaceship and the boys are questioned about him. As soon as it was mentioned that the boys were going to be tortured, I knew it would be something stupid like chalk on a board, Lego stepping, or in this case, a squeaky balloon. Its predictability isn't bad though, as I still did find it to be a funny moment. That moment also shows that Cartman isn't a complete monster yet, as I fully believe modern Cartman would have gave up Marvin's name before the torture even began. Which, to be honest, is what I wish happened, because when thinking about it, I found it funny. This is a weird episode of South Park, and if this was the first episode you saw, you'd probably be confused as to what the show is even about. I do kind of like the ridiculousness. The way South Park handles ridiculousness is something I usually like. They get better at how they do it as the seasons go on though. Other than being a space-themed sequel sort of episode, this episode does just feel like a slightly more stupid, but not necessarily in a worse way, typical episode of these earlier seasons. That's to say, I don't particularly like it, or dislike it. Yes, that's right. I find it to be mediocre. Really looking forward to getting into season 5, because I think that's where I consistently like the show, and I think it gets better and better consistently for a lot of the seasons for me.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
The Red Badge of Gayness has the boys and some other members of the town reenacting the Civil War, but it causes another civil war to occur. Cartman feels like the Cartman I like here. He isn't fully there in terms of his evilness and cold-heartedness, but he's getting there, and this episode shows off how he likes to take over. Him trying to get the Confederates to win the reenactment is such a Cartman move, and the mere concept of that is great. Him using drunk people as his puppets is also brilliant. While this episode isn't hilarious all around, it is good, and while Scott Tenorman Must Die is known as the changing point for Cartman's character, I think this episode is a massive one too, and massively overlooked. I think this is a big changing point for South Park in general. This episode, I believe, is the one where Trey Parker stopped fully doing Cartman's voice on his own, and instead still does it, but is aided with a computer. The other boys' voices now sound pretty much like they will through the rest of the show. While this episode isn't the funniest all around in terms of jokes, the structure of the story and Cartman as a whole is just funny, even if it is without a ton of individual brilliant moments. I like this episode, and I'm glad this sort of structure would become the norm for South Park. One thing I love about Cartman as a character is it's impossible to completely beat him. There's worse outcomes for him, but he rarely ever sees anything as a complete loss. The ending of him pointing out that he can't be Stan and Kyle's slaves because their side won is so good.
Abolished!
He's right, boys. Slavery is illegal and immoral, partially in thanks to the North winning the Civil War.
Aww!
I think part of why the story works so well is it's one of the episodes of the town's adults being complete dumbasses and easy to trick. I may only like this episode in terms of what this individual episode brings to the table, but for what the show becomes afterwards, I appreciate this episode a shit ton more.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics is one of the episodes of the first 3 seasons I've seen the most. It's definitely the most in my recent years of watching South Park. The episode is basically an animated version of a Christmas album released for the show, the main differences being the added Mr. Hanky clips to allow for an actual narrative, and the addition of the Jesus and Santa duo. I think the reason I've seen this episode so much is just because it's so easy to follow. There's barely a narrative here, and you're just expected to enjoy the dumb Christmas songs.
And that is why I go to Japan and walk around and cry. Hi there, Mr. Shintoist. Merry f***ing Christmas. God is gonna kick your ass, you infidelic pagan scum. In case you haven't noticed, there's festive things to do. So let's all rejoice for Jesus. Merry f***ing Christmas to you.
I love Mr. Garrison's song. I think Satan's song is great. I thoroughly enjoyed the Jesus and Santa duo.
The dusty
Santa, that's not a Christmas song, bud.
I know, but there's like 300 Jesus Christmas songs and only 4 f***ing Santa ones.
But on the other side of things, I don't really care for Shelly's song or Cartman's song. Having a mixed bag is almost guaranteed to happen when it comes to an episode that's a mashup of clips. That said, I definitely enjoyed this episode. Far more than I didn't. After the death of the lead voice actress on the show, who I'll just call Mary so I don't mispronounce her name horribly and seem like a completely terrible person, Trey and Matt didn't think it'd be right recasting straight away. Mary committed suicide before the episode Red Badge of Gayness, and there's no female voice actress used in that episode either. The reason I decided to bring this up though is because Trey and Matt kindly gave a bit of a tribute to her here, having just some of the characters she played appear at the end. The Mary side of things won't affect my score in any way here, I just thought it to make sense to bring up since others may not know the history. I don't know the history completely either, but I know some bits of information. Overall, and this is the first time I can say it, I really like this episode. It's incredibly rewatchable due to being light on narrative, and the entire thing is worth watching just for the Garrison song.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
Are you there, God? It's me, Jesus. Has Cartman getting a period? In this case, he's bleeding out of his ass. This causes Stan to feel less mature, especially when the other boys get their periods. Even Kyle lies. Meanwhile, Jesus feels like it's expected of him to cause a miracle of some kind to happen to celebrate the new millennium. People want to see God, show us God. I love how Cartman puts so much pressure on Kyle about his period. The doctor's way of breaking news to Kenny's parents about his death was one of the only real funny moments for me. There was also Ron Stewart shitting himself. The only bit I think I even really smirked at was people planning to crucify Jesus again. The only truly memorable part, though, was God's appearance. Mediocre is the obvious choice.
Come on down South Park and meet some friends, man.
This episode has the boys going to a Ricardo concert, and Cartman trying to find the right tone to make people shit themselves. Meanwhile, Mr. Garrison confronts his father about the disturbing amount of sexual abuse between him and his dad. That being none. Okay, this Mr. Garrison plot plows through the main plot. I think this plot is absolutely amazing all the way through. Mr. Hat versus Mr. Mackey. Mackey losing. Garrison being devastated by not being molested.
He never did, Mom, and I think you knew he never did.
No, if I knew, I would have made him do it.
You stood by and let it happen. You saw him come home drunk and then just go right to sleep.
And Garrison's dad's scene in the bar. That scene in the bar being my favourite scene from the first 3 seasons, with the Loch Ness Monster for me.
I think if someone said, have sex with your mother or else I'm gonna kill your son, but he didn't have a gun, I wouldn't do it.
He could have a knife, though.
Yeah.
Knife.
Sure, a knife.
If a killer put a knife to my throat and said, have sex with your father or else I'm gonna kill your mother while having sex with you, I would have sex with myself.
Just the ridiculousness of the entire thing. Obviously the people wouldn't think the dad's serious. There's also him casually mentioning he was molested earlier that week by his uncle.
There was my uncle, Richard. He molested me.
When was that?
Saturday. Last Saturday.
The concept was consistently funny for the plot. The fact that the mum hates that the dad didn't molest Garrison is fucking insane. Something about Garrison makes all this stuff that shouldn't be funny. And I think it's just because, yeah, Garrison is awful, and he's portrayed as awful. The dad being an actual sane person in this plot also makes it work. That being said, he wasn't exactly normal. By the end, he wound up getting someone to rape his kid. Strangely enough, another show I love had a similar plot, with Mac from Always Sunny in Philadelphia wanting to be molested by his gym teacher.
What are you doing?
What do you want me to do?
Most of The Boys plot is about the boys trying to best the New Yorker kids at the concert in some way. Luckily, Cartman finds the brown noise. I don't think this plot's bad, but not good. It's mediocre. Me enjoying the Garrison plot so much means that the fairly dull but not bad main plot means that I overall like this episode. I love the Garrison plot, but it doesn't push it to a really like as a whole because the main plot isn't particularly funny or memorable.
Come on down south, dog, and meet some friends, man.
Because the main plot isn't particularly funny or memorable. Something about the earlier seasons of South Park just feels a bit off to me, yet somehow nostalgic. I think a lot of it might just be that the characters aren't as well developed, and the humour just isn't as funny for me. The early seasons do have funny moments, but I just think Trey Parker hadn't nailed South Park's humour at this point. But that's this season covered and all for this video, and until next time, bye I guess.